Hello, friends. Good afternoon. It is now officially the afternoon as of 10 seconds ago. I welcome you to another episode of Environmental Justice Now. My name is Rosina Snow, and I am the Director of Communications here at Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. I am also joined by Reverend Desiree Jenkins, who is our Operations Manager, and our guests, Stephen Wade and Doug Allen, who I believe is going to join us shortly. And I will give full introductions to our guests in a moment. Before we start today, I would like to do a brief land acknowledgement so we can remind ourselves that we gather on the unceded land of Indigenous peoples. I am actually joining from Charlottesville, but I think most of our guests are in Richmond, Virginia, which is the land of the Powhatan and Chickahominy peoples. I believe Charlottesville is Monacan land. If you are unsure whose land you are on and want to find out, you can visit nativeland.ca to find out, and I will put that link in the banner below us right now. So when we think about the climate crisis and environmental justice, pedestrian safety might not be the first thing that comes to mind. But ensuring that greener modes of transportation are also safe is actually really important to our work, which is why we teamed up with the Partnership for Smarter Growth and the Virginia Department of Health to conduct a safety study on one of the main corridors in Richmond, Chamberlayne Avenue, between Mitchell Street and Brooklyn Park. That's right? That's the stretch that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And today we are excited to talk about the results of this study, as well as the community response so far, with our guests, Stephen Wade and Doug Allen. And I will introduce them. Stephen Wade is the board president of Partnership for Smarter Growth, which advocates for a better, more sustainable way to build and maintain our towns and cities. He also currently works for the Virginia Department of Social Services on making substance use disorder prevention, treatment, and recovery more equitable and accessible. Is there anything else that I left out that we should definitely add?
That's a good place to start.
Okay. Welcome, Stephen. And Doug is not here yet, but he serves on the board of PSG as well. He is an urban planner who has been a vocal advocate for better pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, transit improvements, and zoning reform in the Richmond region for close to a decade. So, welcome everyone. And some of us may not be familiar with Partnership for Smarter Growth. Would you mind, Stephen, telling us a little bit about that organization?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you again so much. It's really wonderful to be here with Virginia Interfaith Power and Light collaborations, partnerships. That's the only way this kind of work is going to happen. So we're really thrilled and thankful to be a part of a team with them. I'm the president of the board of the Partnership for Smarter Growth. We're a local, regional nonprofit organization in the area. We've been around many years. We work on primarily local policy. We really want to see the Richmond region be a sustainable, safe, healthy, and affordable place to live and work and grow. And so we advocate our local elected officials in Chesterfield, Henrico, the city of Richmond, Hanover. We partner with our community members to educate and learn from them, really at the intersection of housing, transportation, and land use. We really want to discourage more and more housing further and further away in our forests and near our streams and around our farmland, and really encourage more development in our core, in existing communities that's affordable, walkable, and safe. And so we work to craft zoning policies that make for compact and walkable buildings. We work on road design to make it safer and healthier. I work primarily in the affordable housing space, ensuring that our current residents have the ability to stay where they are, and for new residents that have a place to live. I think anyone who works in our community should be able to live in our community, and even people who can't afford housing should still have a safe place to be. So we really are advocating and educating around these kind of the intersection of kind of environmentalism, housing, transportation, and land use. We see that as a critical nexus, and we're excited to kind of keep building those relationships and talking about it more.
Mm-hmm. And I think most people would generally agree with those goals or be aligned with that. At the same time, though, there are obstacles that come up. People hear the word development and they have a really strong reaction, and oftentimes that's based in past experiences or I don't know, attitudes about big development companies or whatever. So I'm curious, what are the obstacles, the biggest obstacles to the goals you're trying to achieve? What are some of the hesitations people have around those goals?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's fair to recognize that change is hard. Change to how we do things is hard, but I also think that our communities are changing, and so I think we believe that we would rather have a say and a voice in how they change. We can sit back and try to stop change or let change happen as it's going to happen outside of us, but we really think the more community members can get engaged in decision making, feel empowered, feel excited, the more they can actually craft development to fit the kind of things they want. We believe that development should benefit the community. Development doesn't have to be a negative. That there's community benefits it can bring, from affordable housing to open space to sidewalks to trees. That we really believe in kind of a kind of proactive, positive vision for what we do want our communities to look like. And so, I think generally, one of the main obstacles is just, political and community will. When we see communities around the country that are growing in what I would perceive as more healthy, sustainable ways, there's a bit of a community consensus and a community voice around, here is the type of development we want. Here are the type of neighborhoods we want. Here are the sidewalks and buildings and community spaces that are important to us. And having developers respond to those demands, and not just waiting for a developer to design something that might not fit our vision. And so the more we can develop a proactive vision for the because I would imagine a lot of Chamberlayne Avenue being, we'll talk about it more, how kind of unsafe it is, really an unpleasant place to walk, frankly. That's not the kind of community we want. What is the kind of community we want? And let's design it and let's demand it. And so I think the more we can have a community will around it, and then frankly get our elected officials to have political will around it, the kinds of things that matter for that, like the road design, how the road is designed matters. How many lanes there are there bike lanes, are there sidewalks, can I walk there with my 8-year-old, and can I walk there with my mom? Those are the questions I ask every day. And then, is there funding for affordable housing so people that live there now can stay there as it grows? So I think part of our vision is putting forward a proactive vision, a proactive demand, frankly, for the type of communities that we should expect. So,
Thank you. That's a really great answer. I'd like to welcome Doug Allen to the conversation. It's good to see you. And Doug, we were just talking about a partnership for Smarter Growth's work. Do you go by PSG, like shorthand? Okay. All right. So I can say that and it won't be nonsense. All right. And we were just talking about some of the obstacles that can get in the way of the goals that you hold, which generally seem like they would be appealing to most people. But it can be, we have to bring the community along with us and bring our elected officials along with us and make sure that that there's clarity around what our shared goals are. So coming to the topic at hand, walkability. How important is walkability or pedestrian safety in building smarter and more sustainable cities? And Doug, I don't know if you want to take this one.
Sure, and I apologize, it's a little choppy on my end, so if I don't come through or if I miss a question, just please let me know. But yeah, I mean, so walkability, and when I say walkability, or when we talk about walkability, I want to make sure that that's kind of a catch-all phrase that doesn't just mean people, walking. You have to also, when we say walkability, we're also talking about people who are using wheelchairs, people who are using, will use walkability to kind of include all of those ways to get around, basically outside of a vehicle, right? So I think when you're talking about
Doug, you might need to turn off your video so we can get your audio to be a little bit crisper.
As being kind of a cornerstone of a smart and sustainable city, you have to think about it's not just a phrase. It comes with infrastructure. It comes with the subsequent type of development. Is doable outside of a vehicle. Sustainable, there's a lot of definitions for sustainability, but if you're talking about
Okay, yeah, I think we're having some real choppiness issues. We do want to hear what you have to say though, so I wonder if you might be able to turn off your video, and then maybe we'll be able to hear you better. And I do want to lift up what Doug said about, yeah, walkability being an imperfect term, because not everyone is walking, that people are transporting themselves in many different ways. And some people are using wheelchairs and other people are using other vehicles. And every one of those modes of transportation needs to be guaranteed safe passage through our city.
Yeah, and I'll chime in here for 1 second while Doug maybe turns off his camera. And a couple things I would add in terms of kind of walkability and kind of a sustainable city. Transportation is the second biggest cost in a family's budget. And so if you're a family that has to own lots of cars, owning a car is much more expensive than riding the bus or walking or biking. And so if we want our city to be affordable, then we also probably got to work on ensuring people have reduced transportation costs. And one way to really do that is to increase the safety and consistency of mass transit and walkability. And also just from kind of a sheer space perspective, we've designed so many of our cities, frankly, for cars. We've designed roads for cars. We've designed parking lots for cars. I guess it's a radical idea, but cities should be for people. And so I think I'd rather us spend more time thinking about how we build housing for people, how we build instead of housing for cars. And so we just, again, thinking about Chamberlayne Avenue, if you walk down that sidewalk, the number one thing dominating your line of sight and your life are cars. And so, there's not enough room in our city for all these cars and for more cars. I'd rather have more room for people. And so just thinking about a city that's sustainable, a city that's equitable is not full of cars. It's unexpensive, it's unsafe, it's unpleasant, and it physically can't fit. And so I do think really thinking about how do we house more people in our city and fewer cars is something that I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm from New York City, which I think is a good example of, a city with very dense city that's supported by very, very good transportation. Compared to other places, I didn't even get my driver's license until I was 27. So I think that speaks to that. But there's not many places that are that good. It's probably, I don't know if there's any other city in the US that has transportation that's quite that good. And if it's not very good, people are going to choose their cars. And then you have it being not great, like you have to wait for a bus or something. And then you go further down that spectrum and to being like actively unsafe, which is what we're going to talk about. And you mentioned, Stephen, I heard you use the word equitable, and I wanted to follow up with that and ask, what is the state of pedestrian safety in Richmond overall, and is it an equity issue? Is it worse in some areas than other areas, and then is that related to issues of equity?
Absolutely. As I was saying earlier, also people who are low income own fewer cars, and so much more likely to be transit dependent, sidewalk dependent. We'll talk a little bit more later about the high injury road network is the technical term, basically where are the roads where most pedestrians get hit and killed. You're going to find those, largely in lower income communities, communities of color. Again, that's, every historical marker of our city is based on this kind of racial and economic segregation, and metrics like pedestrian safety align with that as well. And so this is very much an equity issue. What type of people do we value in our city? Whose lives do we value? How do we value them in our infrastructure? And then again, I think Chamberlayne Avenue, as we'll get into, 20% of the residents there live below the poverty line. So many of them are going to be transit dependent. But that also means a lot of them are going to be spending their money on that corridor, investing in that corridor. And it's also, unfortunately, one of the corridors that's dealing with a lot of with Richmond's eviction crisis. And so we have a lot of residents who are living transiently and housing unstable, and that's all connected to this as well. And then this area of Chamberlayne as well is a predominantly African-American community, and historically and currently. And so 63% of the population, according to the statistics, is African-American. And so, as we know, as I said earlier, minority communities, communities of color have faced, conscious oppression from the urban planning, development, transportation planning communities in practice, from, knocking down Jackson Ward and putting up a highway to, the one-way streets that dominate our communities that we're trying to speed, white flight and suburbanites. So this is a long history that we're trying to fight against, and I think it's important to be explicit. And also, as Doug was saying, hopefully he can hop back on with his tech, but there's a number of residents with disabilities in that corridor as well. And so people who are in a wheelchair or differently abled have every right to access our city in a way that is respectful and honorable, and safe and healthy and enjoyable. And so the fact that we design our cities and our transportation systems where if you're in a wheelchair, you literally can't get places you need to go, to me is at its base unfair. And we have a number of elderly residents on that corridor as well. Again, my kind of shorthand, I think, for anybody out there, if you're walking around somewhere and you want to say, well, is this a safe place to walk or bike? Ask, would I bring my kid out here to walk or bike, or would I bring my mom or dad out here to walk or bike without me? And if I think if I would trust that neighborhood as a place for my kid or my mom or dad to go get some groceries, go to school, then I think we're doing okay. But designing a city for me is not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to design it for the whole range of our community. And no one can say with a straight face that Chamberlayne is a place where you'd feel comfortable with that now. And so, yeah, I think there's a number of ways that kind of equity historically and contemporarily, walkability, transit expansion, road design, all those things play in, have kind of an equity component to them that unfortunately play out in a negative sense on Chamberlayne at the moment.
Thank you. That's a really thorough answer. And I hope that gives people
Absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead, Desiree.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Desiree too, has got some experience on there as well too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I absolutely agree with you, Stephen. I thank you for sharing your insights, because growing up in that particular area, you do become blind, if you will, or numb to the issues with transportation, or the issues with being able to just cross the street safely. I remember as a little girl, we would, me and my group of friends, we would be out walking, playing around, back when your child could be out late and you don't have to worry about anybody abducting them. But I remember just being out, and we would have to make a mad dash across the street to avoid being hit. And we were probably in, somewhere in elementary school. And so I'm grateful for this project, and I'm grateful for the time I had to share in it and help to come up with some of the data that we found. However, I'm just, wondering, I guess, what has taken us so long? That's just more of you can answer if you want to, but it's also a rhetorical question, because it's just so much happening in that area. And doing the walk, I did have an opportunity to speak with a young lady who was in a wheelchair, and she shared how unsafe she felt. Even though where she was located down by the James Apartments, she did have the walkway, the crossway, the ADA accessible areas. However, she still felt unsafe because she found herself trying to hurry across the street because cars would not slow down. or if sometimes she said by the time she got to the median area, a car would just shoot right by her. So it's like, it's a really sad situation. And again, I'm just happy to be involved and a part of what we're doing now.
Thanks, Desiree.
Absolutely.
We just had a comment on Facebook asking, are there findings from the Chamberlayne Avenue study that we were going to hear about? Yes, so I'd like to go ahead and play the clip from, so we actually produced a video as well that sort of sum up some of the findings from this walkability study. And we're going to play, it's about a 4-minute video that's up on our YouTube, but it's also, we're just going to play one clip from it, and then we'll also talk about other results that are mentioned in the clip. So thanks.
So we went out a couple of times over the course of the last several months to walk the corridor, to get a sense of what it was like to be a pedestrian in that corridor. We found that the corridor was indeed unsafe for pedestrians. The sidewalks need a lot of work. They were sometimes in places you could only walk one abreast. There were lots of overhanging trees. There were places where the sidewalk was broken. There was plenty of opportunities for trip hazards. For the entire corridor, I think we may have seen 4 crosswalks. That was more than a quarter of a mile. And so it was quite a bit of challenge for people who either were walking, biking, and we did notice several people who were in wheelchairs. And so it was difficult to navigate because all the crosswalks did not meet ADA standards.
Thank you. Are we all muted right now? Can you hear me? Okay. In addition to some of the issues that are mentioned in that clip, they also found that there were no bike lanes, that just sort of the number of lanes on that avenue and maybe some other factors sort of encouraged speeding of cars. And that a lot of people in the video talked about how fast the cars were going and how that would impact them and how they noticed it. And then also that there were no crosswalks near bus stops. So there's a dearth of crosswalks in general, but the fact that they're not near bus stops where a lot of people are walking to try to get to the bus stop to catch the bus was another big issue. So I don't know if either of you would want to comment on any of those, like if you've experienced any of those yourself, or just have any thoughts on those findings.
During the walk that we conducted back in August, I want to say it was the 11th, or I think that was a date. However, during the walk, what we found, just standing and watching the rotation or the cycles of the traffic lights, we found was that people were racing. Of course, we see that all over the city, though, people racing, trying to beat the yellow light. And we also saw that as far as pedestrians trying to cross the street, it was difficult because some of the signs, the do not walk, that pedestrians would usually follow, press the button. The sign is supposed to give them an indication when they can walk. They would have to go through maybe 2 or 3 cycles of the traffic light before they had an opportunity to walk. So we found some of them running across the street or trying to just beat the traffic because they didn't want to wait through 2 or 3 cycles of the traffic light. So, and speed was definitely a factor. Again, you would see people racing or trying to run across the street to avoid being hit.
Yeah, that doesn't sound safe. And I don't think we mentioned, but there have been deaths on this corridor. In recent years, there have been several. I'm guessing not just recent years as well. I don't know if either of you can speak to that.
Yeah, I think the report said between 2016 and 2022, there were 4 fatalities and 19 crashes. I would assume that involves pedestrians. So yeah, one death too many. And I'll just mention briefly, as someone who bikes a little bit, our video has some people biking as well. Very, very, very little bike infrastructure. There is Brook Road, which is parallel, which has some decent infrastructure, but being a biker is not something you would really ever do by choice on Chamberlayne Avenue. And so the need for a complete rethink, frankly, of that road is long overdue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would you say? So why don't we talk a little bit about the sidewalks being busted up? Like how does that contribute, and how does that deter people walking by foot, people using wheelchairs? This seems like something that should be maintained as a matter of course,
Yeah, no, I think there's lots of different critical pieces. I mean, maybe I'll step back briefly and say, I mean, in kind of planning terms, people have heard different terms, but I think some common ones we throw around are things like road diet, and also a term like complete streets. These are kind of big picture ways to think about transforming not only the road, because you have to think about, frankly, the road, you have to think about the sidewalk, you have to think about the building that's next to the sidewalk. All of those contribute to what the place is, how the place feels, how it functions socially, economically, culturally. And so at the very least, this road is much too fast, much too big. And so, and that goes everything to how many lanes there are, the width of the lanes, how many stops there are along the way, how much visual things of visual interest to keep cars kind of moving at a slower pace. One of the things, obviously, that is being thought about is this is maybe, I mean, it's probably the second busiest, I should know, one of the busiest bus corridors already in Richmond. And we're talking about the north-south bus rapid transit going along this corridor. And so to make the bus rapid transit, it's going to need some priority in that corridor to move. People will ride something if it's faster and quicker and easier and nicer. It's not rocket science. And so if you put the bus in traffic and make it slow and make it frustrating, shock of all shocks, people aren't going to want to ride it as much. And so thinking about how you design a road that serves, again, as I said earlier, I'm thinking about a road that serves people and not cars. And so if you have a bus that's got 40 people in it versus 40 cars that all have one person in them, those are two very different ways to think about the road. But if you're trying to move the people, you'd say, let's think about how to move this bus through. And so that does require a different type of design of the road, kind of signaling and such. And so both kind of thinking about bus rapid transit road design, a road diet to kind of slow it down. There's not that much traffic on this road, maybe at peak times in certain directions. But again, this is about moving people, not cars. And then complete streets. You want to have it a street that serves my 8-year-old as well as my 80-year-old, And so how do we make a street that has, why can't it be a beautiful street? Let's have some beautiful trees. Let's have some beautiful murals. Let's have some great signage about the awesome businesses that survive there despite Chamberlayne Avenue. And so I think thinking about it as, and then to get a little bit into the weeds, I think if you live in Richmond, you've walked on some sidewalks that are nice. You've walked in some communities where you have room to walk next to your friend and talk, to push a stroller, to push your grandmother. And so having holes in the sidewalk, having gaps in the sidewalk, having no places to cross, how can I walk there with my mom or my kid? And so these are kind of basic elements. But, and to be totally frank, if we give more space to the sidewalk, that's going to be less space for the cars. But that's, I think, some of us, hopefully more and more of us, want to design this place for people and for us and our families and our friends and not for our cars. And so there are real trade-offs. I'm not going to pretend there aren't trade-offs, but I think the kind of vision we're talking about is a different one than exists now. So sorry to kind of go off on a tangent there, but.
Yeah, no, that's a really holistic answer.
That was great.
Yeah. Are there any other results of the study that we haven't lifted up? Anything that was really important for people to know?
I mean, I'll add a little bit. I mean, I mentioned trees, but GRTC is making, I think, some real efforts around their bus stop infrastructure.
What is
But
that? The Greater Richmond
oh,
Transit?
sorry, yep, Greater Richmond Transit Company. They're the ones that run our bus system, our new BRT Pulse line down Broad. We've been wonderfully blessed with some free transit for a while, which has been really fantastic and transformative. But I believe that our bus stops, our bus infrastructure should be places of beauty and places of respect and places of joy. And so I think there are opportunities as the bus rapid transit comes in to really, I mean, we've all waited for the bus. We should have, if it's raining, it'd be nice not to get wet. If my legs were tired, it'd be nice to have a place to sit.
Right.
We have so many wonderful artists in this community. Why are, our bus stops should be full of beautiful art, and a place where you'd like to sit with somebody you like. I don't think that's too much to ask. And so I do think, I'm getting a little bit into kind of placemaking and kind of, but I do think, while the details of roads matter and the angles of turns matter, the more we talk about what's the type of place we want Chamberlayne to be, what would have to be like for me to want to walk there with you all and chat and go to the library, thinking about it as a holistic place, that then makes it pretty clear what you want the roads to look like too. And so it hasn't been, while Desiree, I know spent time there as a youth, she shouldn't have had to, sprint across the street. It should have been a place she could have hung out. And so I'd like to change that future for my kids for sure.
That is great. That's great. I think I hear you, and I totally agree with you as you kind of think about what the issues are, and then think about the impact on the people, the residents in the area. One thing I've noticed, or I recall, is seeing very little clear markings, along the way. There are several businesses who have, I don't know how they did it, but there are several businesses who took over homes that had driveways, and those driveways just run right out into the sidewalk. And if not paying attention, either the person that's walking or the person backing out of the driveway, that could cause a major issue there. So yeah, I totally agree. Some extra markings would be great. I know I'm kind of jumping probably to your next questions. So I'll Rosina.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've already started talking about solutions. As far as solutions, what are some of the more low-lying fruit that you think that GRTC
Yeah.
would be able to get into or address, to address more easily or swiftly, and what are the ones that might require more time and attention? Someone also asked where to from here with these. Oh, I see. Yeah. So we're going to talk a bit about solutions, and then talk about the community response, because there has been a really encouraging community response already. So maybe Stephen, if you could answer the solutions question of it, and then kind of go into the community response, then we can find out where we go from here.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of, and the report, I think is, anyone who hasn't seen it, let's make sure we get it out to everybody and maybe post a link, or it's quite a readable report. We also have put together a beautiful story map, which you can click around a little bit and see a little bit on your computer about it. But I'd really think about it kind of in four kind of, I think, buckets of improvement if we're thinking primarily about the kind of transportation elements of this corridor. So one is reduce speeds. And that's not, I mean, signage and all that enforcement matters, but it's really more road design. But how do we really reduce the speed so that we're not terrified or killed by cars? I think that's just something that we all have to think about. Crossing the street is not pleasant, so it needs to be easier and safer. And again, like as Desiree said earlier, like people are getting halfway across. That goes back to my If you're in a wheelchair, if you're 8 years old or you're 80 years old, that's who it should be timed for, because that's the place we want it to be. It shouldn't be timed for the speed of the cars. So crossing the street should be a focus. Having a basic sidewalk system that isn't full of holes and ruts and probably violates federal civil rights laws should not be okay. So a complete sidewalk network should be part of it. And then, shelters, benches, bus stop infrastructure, which could include some bike infrastructure. I think reduced speeds, crossing, sidewalks, and bus stops are kind of where you can really focus some of your initial energy and thoughts. And some of those, particularly on the sidewalk, crosswalk, bus stop, in other jurisdictions around Virginia and here too in Richmond, when a new development comes in, oftentimes part of that quote unquote community benefit or part of that planning process is they finish the sidewalk in front of them, or they contribute to the development of the bus stop in front of them or near them, or they plant some trees, or they, do something about the public space that is directly adjacent or part of their property. And so again, the more this is a consistent message from the community and heard by our elected officials, when a new development comes in, as is going to happen in some capacity along Chamberlayne Avenue, the more we can consistently say, we demand, a complete sidewalk network, a complete bus stop network, safe crossings. Not that private development will solve all of that, but they are definitely a big contributor. Oftentimes they'll be breaking ground on that sidewalk, so it's an opportunity to do things like that. So I would definitely look to, the development process, but also, again, as I said earlier, being proactive about that. If we come in, frankly, later down the approval process, it's easier to get ignored, frankly. And so the more we can do it earlier, and as the development community says, the earlier they know they're going to be expected to do something, like put in a bus stop or put in some sidewalks or put in some trees, frankly, they can figure that out earlier if they have the opportunity. So let me pause there.
So it seems like there's a big opportunity for the community to take action now in order to support these changes long term. So could you tell us a little bit about what the community response has been so far, and then, how can we capture that energy, grow that energy, and move that into the future?
Desiree, do you want to say anything, or do you want me to go?
Go ahead. I'm going to feed off of you.
I do want to shout out to PSG staffers that we have. Jordan Taylor, who was going to join us today, she couldn't, unfortunately, but she lives on the corridor, a major work contributor to this report. I encourage anyone who has more questions and thoughts to reach out to Jordan, or I connect you to Jordan as well. Just an awesome young person in our city doing awesome work. And Amy Guzelitis, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, moved on to another awesome place, but was another great staffer who did a lot of the community work. So hopefully people who are online in the community have probably heard of Amy or Jordan walking the street a little more than I was. But in events that I've been to, there's been fantastic community engagement. I think one of the opportunities and challenges is that there's a number of neighborhood associations, for example, along this corridor. It's a long corridor. So there, and I think that what I've sensed, there's lots of great energy in a lot of those neighborhood associations who are already doing things like Northside Strong and, all kinds of different efforts that I think are really great. And so I think, how do we support their voices that are already loud and strong? How do we amplify their voices? Maybe we can assist in targeting them to the right staff people, elected officials, and developers who are doing some of the work. And I think the more, maybe it's some subgroup amongst a number of neighborhood associations that kind of coordinate a message for the corridor, so that kind of the neighborhood associations have a relatively unified message and vision for the corridor. I think that kind of strength in numbers can only be more effective. And so again, I think kind of across the neighborhood association and probably business association community, I think there's an opportunity to kind of construct and advocate for, and then frankly educate probably our elected officials about the type of vision they'd like to see. And not that that's going to be easy, I don't think, but I do think, again, there's so much love from those neighborhood associations, love for that part of the Northside community, that I think kind of having a little more focus on the corridor and coordination on the corridor, I think could go a long way, frankly.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I know that there was a screening of the film and a discussion, right? A few weeks ago that was really well attended.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. And by the way, I'm just going to put the link where you can join us in our work. Since we do work with communities of faith, there are several houses of worship along the corridor. And so we've been talking about, we have already made connections, but we were talking about maybe screening the film also in those communities of worship as a way to build support. Because I think probably a lot of people have been, like you said, Desiree, it becomes something that you just sort of like maybe accept or get used to, but it's not something anyone should get used to. So when people see that there is actually a momentum and there are people starting to take action, I think there are probably many people who would want to join that and kind of seize that moment. So like part of our organizing work as an interfaith nonprofit is to do that grassroots organizing with faith groups. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that other than.
No, I think that is great, and I absolutely concur. I did have take a little bit part in connecting with those churches. We had 2 specifically that we connected with and actually participated with us in the area. And so I agree that because many of the people who belong to those different congregations, they don't necessarily live in the area, but they travel through the area. And so they see what's going on. And I think they too would be interested in, moving forth. And what these 2 organizations can come together and a plan that we can devise to get people on board and interested and excited about changing the look of the area, the safety of the area, and the accessibility of the area. So yes, this is very exciting.
Yeah, it is. It is exciting when people come together.
It is.
And, engage both the imagination, engage the science, and just look at all the resources in the community that already exist of community, and utilize that to improve an area. And it's not just about saving lives. It's also about quality of life and so much. It's also, as we said earlier, it is a climate issue as well, because I mean, I don't know, Doug, if that, I'm sorry, Steve, Doug's gone.
Doug has some issues with his internet, so.
Yeah, Stephen, if that link is something that, at PSG, you think about, that climate solutions are also just quality of life solutions and job solutions and all these other types of solutions.
Yeah, definitely. We talk and think a lot about kind of the climate framework, the climate challenges, and we do see our work very much embedded in the climate movement. I mean, transportation emissions are a huge part of our climate issue, and so the more we can get people to walk and bike and ride the bus is very explicitly a climate issue in terms of making our, the air healthier, reducing emissions, reducing the need for concrete roads further out in the suburbs. And, as someone who works on housing, if you're not doing equity work, I don't think you're doing climate work. That's my perspective. And so if you're not working on corridors that have pollution, that have pedestrian deaths, that have, not enough street trees, that are historically, underinvested communities, then you're not doing climate work. So I definitely see this as very much, and I think in some ways in terms of, the built environment, urban development, this is, I think, some of the kind of front edge stuff and the hard stuff in the climate fight. So very much think that's valuable. And maybe one other thing I'll mention, just kind of as a place people can just kind of be aware of to plug in. I mentioned once or twice the North-South Bus Rapid Transit. It's kind of a long journey to get to Bus Rapid Transit. Basically, that means hopefully there'll be better, faster, nicer transit connecting more places in Richmond, and Chamberlayne Avenue is a big critical part of that. So that's both wonderful for the corridor, but it comes with its challenges, and in terms of that'll create more development pressures on Chamberlayne, no doubt. It'll bring in more outside people, for better and for worse. But all that to say, it's an opportunity. There will be a lot of talk, and so when you're out and about, if you ever hear about North-South BRT is the term talked about, that's your community, and that means people are thinking about your community, and you should be at that table. And so it's a little wonky. It happens, frankly, behind a lot of closed doors, but those conversations about how BRT will happen in Chamberlayne is going to have a huge impact on the type of place it is, how safe it is, that kind of thing. So just kind of make sure you have that on your radar too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you. Yeah. We've gone a little over what I promised our guests we would, how long this would be. I want to thank you so much for your expertise, and also Desiree for your sharing your experience with the project, and also just with that corridor. And I'm going to post the link to the study and to PSG and Virginia IPL on Facebook and under this video on YouTube. And I'll also link to the 5-minute video that sort of goes over the results. But I hope that folks will get involved. Probably what would be the very next step for getting involved? Just reaching out to one of our organizations, or is there an event in the works that we should know about at the moment?
Definitely sign up for the PSG newsletter, psgrichmond.org, psgrichmond.org. We keep up on a lot of these things like BRT, like development happening in the city. So that's a good way just to kind of be a little bit more in the weeds. And then, I would encourage neighborhood associations to coordinate, and we'd be happy to be a part of that. I'm talking offline with a couple neighborhood associations. So we'll just keep, I think you can reach out to me, or we have staff at PSG. We'd love to chat some more. That's definitely for us.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much.
Yep. Thank you.
I hope you have a good rest of your Friday and a great weekend. Thanks everyone for joining.
Appreciate you. Thank you. Yeah.